one of the things I see is that people often who are really smart and really creative tend to be the ones who have the most anxiety. And part of it's because anxiety is about creating stories about what's going to happen in the future. And
hello, everyone. Welcome to the show where we learn from the people who have followed their passion to achieve great success and are impacting many lives. If you're new to this channel, then do consider subscribing to this channel by pressing the subscribe button, and don't forget to hit the bell icon. This episode is being recorded in association with Let's Localize, an organization with a mission to foster micro contributions from communities and businesses to support schools for their need of time, skill, and funding. To know more about Let's Localize, click on the card above or the link in description below. I'm your host, Ajay Mathur, and my guest today is a Harvard Medical School lecturer, a best-selling author, and a globally sought-after speaker. He has authored more than 15 books on personal improvement, mindfulness, and positive psychology. His books have been translated in over a dozen languages. He also does provide consulting to schools, organizations, and hospitals to personal and professional development, and he has conducted workshops in over 24 countries. He's also the board of directors for the Institute of Meditation and Psychotherapy, and his work has been featured in major media outlets such as Washington Post, New York Times, mindful.org, just to name a few. Please welcome the 2 times TEDx speaker, the president of Mindfulness in Education Network, Dr. Christopher Willard. Dr. Willard, welcome to the show.
thank you so much. It's just fantastic to be here. Yeah, this is a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. So before we go into the subject, and I know that you have written more than 15 books on mindfulness and positive psychology and personal improvement, I want to understand what's your why.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was young, I never had anything that we'd call mindfulness that didn't exist, or even positive psychology back in the 80s when I was growing up. And at some point when I was growing up, though, I had some different experiences that I think a lot of us have had of something like mindfulness before we heard that word, right? Just, looking at the clouds in the sky going by, or just walking quietly in the woods, these kinds of things. And when I was in my early 20s, I had a very difficult time with mental health, depression, anxiety, substances, and rediscovered or discovered all these things, started going on mindfulness retreats, started reading a lot more about this idea of positive psychology, which is about how there's probably a lot more right with you than wrong with you. And how can we start to focus in on growing those strengths rather than just focusing so much on what our weaknesses are, our not favorite things about ourselves. And so that just began as a personal journey, and finding suddenly I was happier and healthier and more creative and all these things, and then really wanting to share that with other people. So I started as a teacher, as an educator, and then I became a psychologist, a psychotherapist, and then started doing writing. I mean, basically, I did my dissertation in graduate school, and I thought, I don't want this thing just to sit on a bookshelf and collect dust. I did all this work on it. And I got a book about how to get published. In fact, I got How to Get Your Book Published for Dummies. And I did exactly what it said. And I wrote that first book. And then that was 10 years ago about. And I've just been writing since then, whether it's kind of scientific clinical manuals for therapists and doctors, or whether it's ridiculous children's books and everything in between. I just feel so lucky with what I've been able to do, just to be able to put some stuff into the world that can hopefully really help people.
That's really cool. And I have actually interviewed another person called Emilia Zivotovaskaya. She is also doing positive psychology. I don't know if you know about her. She's in the US as well. It's quite fascinating, that subject, looking at the positive side of it. Yeah. Now, coming back to mindfulness, and your work majority of your work is for the students and kids, teenagers, right? Mm-hmm. Mindfulness is about, as far as I know, is about being present. How do you explain mindfulness? Just give us a short intro, although a lot of people would know it already, but just give us a short intro to a student to understand what is mindfulness really all about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's, it can seem like, well, what's the point of being in the present? And I think back to when I was young, and I would be, trying to focus on something, but my mind would be still thinking like, why did I say that thing at the party? Or, think about something that happened in the past, right? Or maybe I'd be worried about the future. Like there's a test coming up next week and I'm going to fail the test and never get into university and all these kinds of worries. But if I was able to just be in the present moment, and if we're able to be in the moment, we're actually a lot happier. And the research actually tells us this is true. There's this cool study where they asked people what they were doing and how focused they were, and they text you a few times a day asking this, and they found that what you're doing is actually less important to how happy you are as how much you're in the moment, how present you are. So being in the moment really makes us happier. And so it's about learning how to just be aware of what's going on in the moment and just have some degree of acceptance about that, and some, not judging ourselves or our situation quite so harshly. So we can just respond rather than react to what's going on. And it makes us happier, it makes us healthier. All kinds of amazing brain research on how actually we grow new connections in these parts of our brain that help us focus and help us regulate our emotions in different ways. Help us connect more with other people. So it's really exciting where the research is anyway on this mindfulness stuff.
Let's think a little bit more about it. Just give me some examples of how in the classroom kids can be mindful. How can they practice being mindful in classroom? This kind of setup.
Yeah, for sure. And in the classroom, there's so many opportunities where we get stressed out, right? Teacher calls on you, right? Or you have to go give a talk in front of the class or do public speaking, or, there's that moment when the teacher's handing around the exams and you're sitting there getting more and more nervous. And those are opportunities where we can maybe just do something as simple as, one of the ways we can get into the moment is with our five senses. So our thoughts are racing to the past or the future, but our five senses really keep us in the present. So one thing I do sometimes is just take a breath in and just follow my awareness and attention down into my feet and just feeling my feet on the ground. And just asking myself, are my feet dry or damp? Are my shoes tight or loose? Are my feet warm or cold? Comfortable or uncomfortable? And maybe just press your feet gently into your shoes, into the ground. The floor hard or soft. And then just on the next breath, just bring your attention back upward, back outward again. And then you'll notice that even just in maybe 30, 60 seconds of focusing on sensations, focusing on the edges of our body or our feet, right? Mind is a bit more clear. We're not racing to the past or future. And so practices like this, or maybe just taking a moment to notice the sounds around us, sound from the left, from the right, from in front, behind, right? We're then a little bit more focused and present. And that's about the amount of time it takes for the test to get around the room and get to you, or to take a few breaths between questions on an exam so that you're really resetting your brain for focus. That these are really great moments in the classroom, certainly, of any age, whether you're a kindergartner or whether you're a university student, anywhere in between, to be able to gather your attention and focus and settle yourself down, to be able to focus and be more creative and all those things that we hope for when we're learning as a student.
I really like that the senses are in present, everything else is in past or future. That's really powerful if you think about it, because everything that you feel right now is only right now. It can't be in future.
Right. And it's just gone again. Yeah. So for me, I really like, there's all kinds of breathing things we can do to get into the moment, but I really find just listening or just feeling sensations, or just maybe looking around the room, noticing the corners or noticing the colors. These kinds of things, they get us out of that unhelpful thought stream and a little bit more focused. And then we'll get carried off again by our worries, but we can get a little moment of peace and we train our mind to stay a bit more still and in the moment, not wander off quite so much.
So how do you teach mindfulness to children, and how it is different than teaching it to adults?
Yeah, well, for younger kids in elementary school, I think it's important to bring in visualization, to bring in movement, to maybe make it inspiring and fun in some different ways. So for example, one thing that I did is I wrote a book with a friend of mine called Alpha Breaths. And this is just like an alphabet, basically, of fun breathing practices. It's like A is for the alligator breath. You can breathe in and then breathe back out as you snap your jaws shut. Or C is the hot chocolate breath, or maybe I suppose in England, right, you might have a cup of tea, right? If it's too hot, right, you have to blow out to cool it off. Breathe in, smelling your cup of tea. Blowing out, cooling off. These are some ways that we can regulate our breath. And your breath is like a remote control. It can really turn the volume on your emotions or big reactions in your brain or stress. So that what you're actually doing is, as you're regulating your breath, you're regulating your body and your nervous system and your brain. And then you're regulating your attention and your impulses and your emotions, which you're going to need in social situations or sports or school or all kinds of places. So our breath can be this one way in. And then also making it, as kids get older, a friend and I are developing a little set of cards that we're calling the what is it called? Train your mind like a ninja. And, ninjas are always cool, right? So it's, mindful walking, but walk like a ninja as silently as possible. That takes so much focus. But if you've ever, as an adult, done mindful walking, then you know that it's about really focusing on every step and all the sensations of every step. But if you say walk like a ninja without making noise, then actually the same thing is happening. You can't think about anything but the soles of your feet and the muscles in your body as you take each footstep. And so you're not thinking about the test next week or the birthday party last weekend, or breathe like a ninja without making a sound, right? All these kinds of things can be really fun, especially for kind of more middle-aged kids. And as folks get into high school, or I can't remember what you call it over there, secondary school, I suppose, right? I think bringing mindfulness into other things that we love, maybe mindfully listening to your favorite piece of music. Put on a music and maybe just focus on one instrument as you're listening to your favorite song. And that's 4 or 5 minutes of focused attention with your favorite song. And it's not, it's just, as good as focusing on your breath or sounds or concentration or something, but you're doing it with a piece of music that you love. And so there's ways that we can start to bring mindfulness into everything that we do, especially as young people start to get older and into adolescence, where you might not want to be doing an alligator breath when you're a teenager.
Of course, but I love that alphabet idea. That's pretty fun for kids to do. That's really cool. You mentioned about visualization, right? And when you are visualizing something, you're actually doing some sort of imagination, which is not a present moment, really. So how does that work together with being present? Because I think visualization is not being present.
Right. I think this is really tricky. And in a sense, what it's training us is we're putting our mind deliberately where we want it to be from the present moment. So yeah, maybe we're imagining ourselves as a mountain, or maybe imagining or feeling our breath like waves of the ocean or something like that. But what we're really doing in that moment is, even if we're not exactly in the present, we're training our minds and we're training our concentration, almost like the way that we train a muscle, right? We go like this, at the gym with a weight, and this muscle gets activated and gets bigger and bigger, right? Same thing in meditation, or even a visualization. If you keep imagining that mountain or the waves of the ocean, you're actually creating new connections in your brain that then make it easier to focus and come back to the present over and over again, to whatever might be happening here. So, right, this doesn't do anything, but it can be helpful, right? Or lifting leg weights so that, I'm not playing soccer or football when I'm doing that, right? But it's me stronger for that time that I need to be playing football or swinging the cricket bat or whatever it might be. So that's kind of how I think about visualization, and it keeps us focused. It trains our mind to stay focused where we want it to be.
And with that kind of visualization, the example that you just gave, the research has found that people are able to become master in doing what they were visually practicing. I mean, there has been some research in, I don't know which university did that, but they asked people to think about practicing volleyball, I think it was. And some people did physically, some did mentally, and they both got more or less the same results.
It's kind of amazing because if you do, this is a practice called elaborative rehearsal, which is a very fancy sounding name for just, imagine yourself like hitting the, tennis racket over and over again or whatever it might be, but you're actually activating almost all of the same parts of your brain as if you're actually swinging the tennis racket. So it really is powerful in how it trains your brain, even if it doesn't exactly train your body. So it's amazing, those kinds of studies. Yeah.
Sure, yeah. So in one of your, I think it's the most recent book where you talk about raising resilience in kids. And I totally agree that we need to learn that. But at the same time, when you look at very young kids, like toddlers, right? They fall around 38 to 40 times a day before they learn to walk. They are actually naturally pretty resilient, right? They just
Absolutely.
bouncing back and start to do it. Now, when do we forget that? We already were born with that kind of skill, isn't it? And then we forget and we start to learn. And I thought that only the adults are looking for being, more resilient, because there are so many books out there, grit and resilience and whatnot. And then I got your book, which is about teenagers being less resilient. So I want to know how and why do we forget it in the first place? And how do you improve it then from your book?
I think, I think over here in the States, and I think in a lot of Western cultures where, we're not challenging our kids enough, or we're doing too much work for them. In the States, we call this helicopter parents, who are kind of just in the background hovering, or snowplow parents who are clearing the path for their kids instead of letting them, learn from their own mistakes. Just as, again, that toddler who falls down 30 or 40 times a day. And so what happens if we pick the toddler up every time when they're 2 or 3 is they never bother to learn to get up again, and they expect us to help them. Same thing if they fall down in their academic subjects, or if they, fall down and get tired in their, friendships, and we kind of fight all their battles and resolve all their conflicts for them. Or same thing in their, again, in their tennis game or their football game. And so what's important is that kids really have the resilience to pick themselves back up, literally, right, when they're 2 or 3, but also figuratively when they fall down in these emotional ways. And what we know is that it's not an easy world. Our kids are going to have a difficult time. And rather than fix everything for them, right, we want to teach them how to fix things for themselves. And then they learn how to self-soothe. They learn how to what's called self-regulate, which is like manage the disappointment and then dive right back in, right? With grit, like Angie Duckworth would say, or with more resilience. But I think one of the things that we've done when we're comfortable and we can have a comfortable world and make a comfortable world for our kids is, why not? It's easy enough to do in this world that we're in, but it ends up being a disservice to them when we don't let them learn from their own mistakes, or we do everything for them. And so giving them a chance to fail and then learn from their mistakes is, I think, really, really important. And to me, that's what resilience is. A friend of mine says it's bouncing back, basically. I wrote a book called Bouncing Back, Linda Graham. And I think that's such a great way of thinking about what resilience really is. We want to be able to bounce back from the disappointment in school, the disappointment of the breakup, the disappointment of missing the goal in soccer, or losing the tennis match, to be able to bounce back from those. Because at some point, parents can't do all that work for their kids, and then they're very, very fragile, and they start to fall apart into their adolescence or into their young adulthood, which I think is why we see a lot more concern about mental health among teenagers and young adults than we used to, is, I think, some of that parenting and over-parenting that a lot of kids are getting these days.
So we know now that parents are to be blamed for this then.
Basically. Well, then I'm like very well employed, because I'm a psychologist for kids and teenagers. So.
Okay. In the book Raising Resilience, you also talk about building a wiser brain. What do you exactly mean? You like biologically wiser brain, or can you tell us more about it?
What we can do is we can actually help kids get more perspective, and we can improve what are called executive functions, which is planning, staying on track and being able to anticipate the future, learn from mistakes. To me, that's what wisdom really is being able to have perspective. And if it's one thing kids don't have a lot of, it's perspective, right? Because they don't have that much life that they've lived. But there are ways that we can help them take more perspective just by talking through with them when they've had a difficult time or when they've had a success. What was the work that they did to go into that? And then they feel a lot more autonomy and less reliant on us. But they also have a lot more perspective on what they can repeat if something went well in the past and what they can think about in terms of a new strategy for something to do differently going forward. And that's going to be the mark of what we might think of as emotional intelligence, or wisdom in some ways, in a more kind of traditional term for how I often think of emotional intelligence.
Okay, right. So we spoke about the past and present, like being depressed and being anxious and all those things, right? Let's talk about the past. And people are young people, especially, and everybody really in all the age groups. Depression is so popular nowadays, unfortunately, because for people it's so difficult to let go. Yeah, let
Right.
go of the baggage of the past, the baggage of bad experiences, memories, and so on. How do
Mhm.
you how do you address that issue in your teachings and in your practice of mindfulness, to how to let go thing happen?
Right, right. It's such a tricky one, and like you were saying, there's that like fake quote that floats around online. Sometimes it's Buddha, sometimes it's Lao Tzu or something, but it says depression is living in the past, and anxiety is living in the future, and peace can only be found in the present. And again, I don't know who said it, but I do think it's a good point that, right, we can get really stuck in the past, and whether it's depression or trauma, right, the past can drag us down, but we can also learn from the past. And so how do we both like let go of the baggage of it, but also take maybe the wisdom and the lessons of it? And I think that this is really hard. And for years, in my own life, I've heard, people say, let go, turn it over. And I do think it's really, it's hard to let go, right? Sometimes it's like I'm trying to let go, but it's still sticking to me, whatever it might be. So I think, this is where I think like rituals can be helpful. And I think also reminding ourselves there's someone in the mindfulness world, maybe it's Joseph Goldstein, who says, you don't have to just let go. Sometimes it's easier just to not hold on. And I think that can be a useful frame also of like, you just have to stop holding on. And, that feels a little bit more active sometimes because there are things that are hard to let go of. And there are people and there are things that remind us and make it harder to let go of. But the more I think we attend to the present and into the immediate future, right, the more then we become able to let go of the past. So in some ways, I think it's less an action of letting go, more an action of coming to connect in a different way with the present that can allow us to let go. And to think of it also, I spoke about it in that book, but of when we let go, we make room for new things to come in, right? Whether it's like you're cleaning out your attic, you make room for more stuff to go into your attic, right? For better or for worse, right? But as we let go of some of our emotional baggage too, we make room for new emotional experiences to come in that are hopefully more positive ones or more useful ones to us. And when we let go of like our parents' baggage, right, then we can pass new stuff on to the next generation. I think about this with my own kids. What's some of the stuff that my parents did that I want to let go of and not repeat? And what's some of the stuff that my parents did that I want to hold on to and pass on to my kids? And some of both of those is not even going to be conscious. But if I can let go of some of that not so helpful stuff, that's going to be helpful for me. It's going to be helpful for the next generation of my kids and really everyone I interact with. That I'm not bringing my baggage to that interaction or that relationship.
Dave, give me some examples of what kind of rituals can help us in letting go.
I mean, I think sometimes just, even literally, putting some things away, stopping ourselves, from, kind of looking at old, old pictures of people, or trying to create new rituals around, making new connections with people, making new connections with new ways of being, building new habits, starting from stillness and starting from the present moment, that I think can help us to let go of some of that past stuff. And it's, in a way, it's like it's rewriting some of that past stuff. I think about something like often people come to me as a therapist with wanting breakup advice. How do I let go of this? And it's very hard at first, right? And but what you want, and like everything reminds me of my ex, right? It's like, okay, well, what we want to do is get to the place where you can walk down that street and not think of them, or you can go to that park or eat that meal or eat at that restaurant and not think of them again. So what you want to do is create new memories of those places, of those things. And then what's hard is there's people and things that we maybe don't want to let go of. Like if someone, died in our lives, right? You don't want to erase those memories, hold on to them and honor them, but also be able to move on at the same time. So that's maybe different than something like a breakup, where we're trying to pick and choose a little bit what we want to let go of. And we want to let go of the, overwhelmed emotion, but we don't want to let go of the sadness, because the sadness is why we connected with that person who we loved. It's what tells us that we love them. So how do we stay somewhat connected with the sadness without having it be so overwhelming that we can't move forward? And I think those are what, every culture has its own grieving rituals that allow us to do that in different ways.
So it's mainly the removing the neural connections, which are those sort of memories, and create the new, more positive thinking.
Very much. And we actually do then create new neural connections, parallel ones, and even, those old ones do eventually start to wither away, which is, hopefully, we're withering away the ones that are most useful to let wither away, and not the ones that are the important ones.
Yeah, so true. So we've spoken about anxiety being state of being in future, depression being in state of being in past. How mindfulness is different when treating anxiety versus treating depression, because these are two different things.
Yeah, so again, it's coming into and trying to see things clearly. The more we project into the future, the less likely it is to be true. There's more variables, right? Kind of mathematically, or in terms of like chaos, there's fractal theories, right? There's a million more situations that could happen in 10 years than in 10 minutes. I do think that one of the things we can do with anxiety, and one of the things I see, is that people often who are really smart and really creative tend to be the ones who have the most anxiety. And part of it's because anxiety is about creating stories about what's going to happen in the future. And a maybe not so bright or not so creative person can think of 3 different ways the airplane is going to crash, right? And the more smart or more creative person can think of like 300 different reasons why the airplane is going to crash. So it's a blessing and a curse to have that kind of creativity where you can think of all these different scenarios. And then it's really about trying to look at them and think through in some ways, like, is this realistic or is this not particularly realistic? That's kind of taking what we think of as a cognitive behavioral approach. And then also the reality of anxiety is that anxiety really exists, and actually depression too. I did a book on depression, a book on anxiety for teenagers a few years ago. One of the things I noticed was that if you look at the DSM, which is like the big book, or the ICD, International Classification of Diseases, on either anxiety or depression, more of the symptoms are physical than are cognitive, which is surprising for a mental illness, right? Either of these. So we can actually treat anxiety or depression in some ways with in the body. And anxiety, it's very hard to be anxious in your mind if your body is relaxed. So the more we're able to settle down, regulate our bodies, maybe with breathing, with relaxation practices, stress management, getting good sleep, things like that, then we're less likely to be anxious. You can hear my kids in the background, by the way, sorry about that. But the other thing actually that my kids are reminding me of, what do they sound like? They sound very excited. Our bodies, if you think physiologically, excitement and anxiety are almost the exact same physiological reaction. So a friend of mine who's an actor, who's also a mindfulness teacher, who taught me how to do public speaking, which used to make me very nervous, is he said, can you trick your brain when you're nervous? Can you trick yourself into thinking you're just excited? I'm really excited to talk to this 500 people instead of I am terrified to talk to this 500 people, or I'm excited about taking this test, having this interview, playing in this playoff game for my football team, right? Then you're actually taking those sensations and flipping them into the positive. But we only do that when we develop more body awareness through mindfulness, or what's called interoception, which is really being able to respond in real time to the signals that our bodies are giving us. So that's kind of a way of taking what's happening in the moment and maybe transforming it. On the other hand, sometimes we just get anxious because we're anxious. That's what's called a disorder, right? Get anxious at the wrong times. So that is where slowing down our breath, tensing and relaxing our muscles, these kinds of things, other practices that bring us back to the present rather than the horror story about the future, back to the present again and again, our mind is less likely to wander off the leash into the horror story about the future, but is able to stay a little bit more still with the present in the next few moments. And so that can help in terms of that treatment of anxiety.
That's really useful. And when you mentioned about the aircraft example, I kind of started thinking, because I do have this anxiety, although I do travel a lot, but when something happens, the turbulence, they call it,
Right.
I feel I start thinking about 10 ways how the plane can now crash. and also at the same time think about 20 ways on how I will be surviving.
Hey, that's even better though. There you go.
When all this happens, and then sometimes you see, look down, there is a sea, you have more chances to survive maybe on the sea.
If you go in at the angle, then you're less likely to die if you fall into the water.
Exactly.
Pro tip.
Yeah, anxiety gives you a lot of ideas also. Sometimes, right? But anyways, I do still travel. Every time I travel, I do have this anxiety, but it's fine. We can live with it. The other point that you mentioned about the nervousness and excitement, and I had discussion on the same topic with Eric Admeets. I don't know if you know him. He's a very well-known public speaker. And he mentioned that excitement is nervousness with positive outcome, and nervousness is excitement with negative outcome.
I love that. I'm filing that one away. That's really good. Yeah.
So that reminded me of that. And now you've spoken about the using your body, the way you're using your body right now to change the way you're thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
It probably works the other way around also.
Yeah.
So how can you treat your physical problems like pain in your body, backache, or something like that, or you want to heal something even bigger? I mean, I've heard stories that people heal cancers and things like that with just their brain. How does that work? And what do you have to suggest in order? For example, I have a backache, so what should I do to reduce it?
Yeah. There's limits to everything. What mindfulness does, and a lot of mindfulness in the West was developed by, and kind of adapted by Jon Kabat-Zinn, who had this program, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. A lot of that was focused on things like chronic pain and chronic illness. And so he did a lot of what he called the body scan, which is a useful practice. It helps us to become aware of our body, notice the physical pain, and notice our emotional reactions to that pain, which is really useful. And so what mindfulness does around physical pain, and actually then becomes what we can do with emotional pain, is it doesn't so much change the amount of pain that we're in, but it changes our relationship to the pain. So it becomes more accepting in some ways. And actually, when we start to tune in even more to certain kinds of pain, and doing this with a skilled teacher, not just like on your own tuning into it, is that we then notice, oh, this back pain I have, it's not constant. It kind of comes and goes, and it kind of moves around a little bit. Of course, at this time of day, and not as bad at that time of day. But what we walk around with is a story that says, I'm a person with back pain. I always have back pain. So I, can't do this and I can't do that. The more we actually focus on it, that story changes into, I'm a person who sometimes has back pain, and my back pain is different at different times of day. And I'm actually, it slows me down from doing some things, but it doesn't have to stop me from doing everything. And if I work with it, I can see that I can do more even with this pain, or I can listen to it and figure out when do I really need to take medication for it or consult with a doctor because maybe I've got a spinal issue or something like that. And so actually that greater awareness, which you would think would be, why would I want to tune into my pain? We actually then come get to know it better. And then we can change our relationship to it and we respond to it rather than react to it. So then it becomes, okay, now's the point when I go to the doctor, now's the point when I don't. You teach people after surgery or before surgery some of this stuff. They say they're in pain, but they actually take less pain medication because the pain just doesn't bother them as much, even though it's the same amount of pain. They say it's still 9 out of 10 for the worst pain I've ever felt, but it doesn't bother them in the same way. And then we get to really know ourselves and our bodies. If I eat this way, if I exercise this way, if I sit this way, the pain is less or it's more tolerable, or I do have to go to the doctor and work on it. And so that's what starts to happen with physical pain in particular. And stress makes everything worse. The more stressed out we are, our physical pain is going to get worse. Underlying mental health issues are going to get worse. Our attention is going to get worse. Our relationships are going to get worse.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because I do have some minor pains that are been there for quite some time, and I still do all the activities that I'm supposed to be doing regardless of whatever pain. There's one thing that I struggle a lot with, which is, we just mentioned, see the emotional reaction of that physical feeling.
Yeah.
I struggle big time. How can you give an emotional, how can you identify what is the emotional reaction of a pain in your shoulder? I mean, there are so many other practices, tapping and visualization, mindfulness, and tell me if it is out of scope of mindfulness, but how if I have a shoulder pain, for example, right? Just for the example's sake, I have shoulder pain and you ask me to attach some emotion to it, anger, regret, guilt, what it is. I just don't understand. How can I do that?
So what you want to do is lean into the pain, focus on it, and rather than trying to put an emotion onto it or project an emotion onto it, is wait to see what emotions might arise as you kind of set your awareness there. And then you can also sort of simultaneously, in some ways, tune into other parts of your body where emotions start to come from, right? Again, like, excitement or anxiety often feel like, more tension in our chest, or, joy feels like an opening in our chest, right? So kind of noticing as you tune into the pain, what are any other physical sensations that come up with it, or any thoughts that come up with it, or judgments, or memories even, right? I remember when I hurt this shoulder. I remember that airplane ride when it kept me up all night. And then, from there, we might start to notice what emotions are then connected with that particular sensation or that particular discomfort. And then also work a little bit with those emotions some way. Yeah.
So if I'm sitting in a mindfulness meditation, do you think it will be easier to identify those emotional reactions?
So I do, and when we do a practice like the body scan, which you might want to try with a meditation teacher or something, then they're actually helping you to identify what those different sensations are, and then you get to kind of know your own body better. Just like you also, the more you practice, get to know your own mind better and see what it does over and over again. I keep getting this same stupid thought over and over every time I get on an airplane, or I get this pain every time I do this. And then you kind of get to know your own body and your own mind's patterns. And then you can make then you're in charge of making the choice around how do you respond to the mental event or to the physical event happening in your body, rather than being on autopilot and just responding with, I'm going to push through it, or I'm going to not do this, or I'm going to take pain medication, or I'm going to not take pain medication, or I'm going to, not go out and play tennis today, or I am, and then we're more empowered in our bodies and our minds rather than having them dictate to us in some ways what choices we make and what limitations they put on us.
Oh, that's really useful. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
Helpful.
I will try it. I will try it and see if it works. Should. I felt some of the, not all, but sometime I do feel when I'm stressed, I feel in certain part of the body that, yeah, it's not feeling all right because I'm stressed.
Right. I get it in my jaw. I get it in my neck. Like, that's how I know that I'm stressed out. That's where I feel it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, could you share some sort of testimonials or something you worked with somebody who had a situation which, with the mindfulness, became healed, right? If you have any example of any young person, that would be really nice to hear.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel, so lucky on so many levels that I've got, books in different languages and stuff around the world, because I hear 4 or 5 times a week from people by email or by Instagram message or whatever, just about how something's been helpful. And I feel so grateful. I can think about a young man I worked with who had a lot of anxiety, had trouble sleeping, was maybe 11 or 12 years old. I'm trying to think of, he was in 7th grade, so that's about 11 or 12 years old. And his dad would travel a lot for work. He'd worry about his dad when he was traveling. And we did all this work together where we'd do visualizations. I'd guide him in a longer, imagine you're a mountain feeling solid and calm and confident. I used to, on my phone, I would just record these for him and then send them to him so he could listen to them before bed. And his anxiety got so much better over that 6 months. And actually in our last session, he then made his own visualization and read it to me and had me kind of relax into it. And then years later, his mom emailed me, and I had made, also another thing I made with these little card decks of different little short mindfulness practices. And he'd moved away and he was on this camping trip with his school at Mount Kilimanjaro. And she sent a picture of him on the top of Mount Kilimanjaro with a little deck of cards. And it was like one of the best moments of my life, just seeing, this work that, I'd put out there, and inspired by other people's work, right, that have been able to be so helpful to this kid that, got him through life and got him to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. There are other people I've worked with who've, I worked with them when they were in high school, and hearing from them 10 years later saying, I'm still practicing mindfulness and I'm studying to be a nurse now. How can I bring this into my work? Right. These kinds of things I just find so incredibly inspiring when I hear about them from people, who I haven't even seen in 10 years or something. And it's just, yeah, I just feel so lucky to have been part of their journey.
Wow, that must be very fulfilling. So it's truly inspiring. Thanks for sharing that. There is one question that I ask all my guests, which is, what are the top 3 skills or behaviors you think everybody needs in order to grow and be successful and happy, but schools don't teach it?
Well, schools are starting to teach mindfulness, which is great. So I do think mindfulness is incredibly powerful. I also think other things that we might think of as emotional intelligence. I think you don't have to be, in fact, being smart at some point can be a hindrance to people and their success in life, but really learning how to be a kind and compassionate and understanding person who is able to take other people's perspective, or what we might think of as emotional intelligence. I think this is one of the skills that's gotten me incredibly far in life, and I feel so lucky that I was blessed with or practiced, or my parents instilled in me. I don't even know what. So that's another one, emotional intelligence, that I think is really important. And I think the other experience that I've had a lot of in my life that is somewhat integrated into schools is, as you mentioned in the introduction, I've done mindfulness workshops in 24, 25 countries. I've traveled on my own to, 55 or 56 countries. And I think travel has been one of the most important eye-opening things for me to appreciate other cultures, appreciate what other cultures have to offer, to be humble, to be vulnerable, to take risks, and to really understand human behavior and understand actually what's so similar about humans all over the world, all different languages, cultures, costumes, and skin tones and all of that. What are still the common elements that make us human, and what are some of the differences on the surface? And so travel for me has been, and traveling by myself, a vast majority of that travel was just me on my own, has been one of the most important experiences in shaping who I am. And I think also in shaping the successes that I've been able to have in my life as well. So Yeah, and a big adventure too, which is pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Most of the thought leaders in the past, actually, they were travelers.
That's so true. I hadn't thought about that. That's absolutely true. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, great. So what's your mission going forward? You have written so many books, probably many more to come. What's your
Going
big
forward,
goal?
I've got, yeah, I'm doing more corporate work, working with big companies, Google, HubSpot, Mutual of Omaha, doing kind of business, organizations in Southeast Asia and the Mideast. So that's interesting to me. More on resilience. Actually, the pandemic inspired me to create a new workshop on resilience and post-traumatic growth. So I just signed a book contract on a self-improvement book for adults about post-traumatic growth, and that'll be out in maybe 2022, I think. I have to be done by April with the manuscript for that. I'm really excited about that. And then also some other projects on how work can be a calling and our relationship with work as well. And then some other kind of fun books for kids too are in the pipeline. So a lot of different stuff, basically. As just as before we got started, you were telling me about all the careers you've had. I feel kind of similarly, like kind of dipping my toes in all these different things and having adventures and having fun with so many different aspects of my work, which I just love. Yeah.
Sure. And that's a really good strategy, because after COVID, everybody will be requiring some sort of post-traumatic stress
Right.
help.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I mean, I can talk. I have so many more questions coming in my mind. In the interest of time, I would just finally ask you, how can people reach you?
Absolutely. So my website is very easy to find. You can just Google me, Dr. Christopher Willard. It's just drdrchristopherwillard.com. And then I'm also on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and all of those are Dr. Chris Willard, Dr. Chris Willard. And all of those I do like a daily challenge. So like a daily kindness challenge for 1 month, or a mindful eating challenge, or a nature challenge, or a creativity challenge. So there's always something cooking on my social media. Each month there's a different daily challenge for folks to check out too. So yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to add, I like mindful eating concept. Because when you see and feel what you're eating, how much you're eating, how many times you're chewing it, you end up eating less.
Right, right. And making kind of healthier choices too. It's amazing. Yeah.
That is so true. Okay, anyways, thank you very much, Dr. Willard. It was really fascinating conversation. I really loved learning from you, especially from the perspective of young people. Thank you very much for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you so much, AJ, for having me, and look forward to our paths crossing at some point in the future.
Sure. Thanks a lot. Everyone, if you are looking to know more about mindfulness, especially from the perspective of parents or teachers or students yourself, then please do check Dr. Willard's website. I will put all the links in description below, and the contact details that he has just shared, they will all be there. So if you need to, please do reach out to him. And if you have not yet done so, then please do consider subscribing to this channel by hitting the subscribe button, and don't forget to hit the bell icon, because that is going to tell you when I upload a new video. So till then, you take care. Goodbye.